Hello, it's Mr. Mihi here, and today we're going to talk about property. More specifically, we're going to answer the last part of the 4-part series to the question of how much money do I need to buy a property? We'll run through the last financial consideration, and that is how much money will I have to pay in legal fees? So to answer this question, you first need to hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm. So with that done, the biggest part of the legal fees comes down to something known as stamp duty. It is effectively a tax that you pay every time you buy something that is worth a lot of money, such as a property or a car. Every state has their own formula on how to calculate stamp duty, but the total amount that you'd have to pay is dependent on really 3 things: the price of the property, whether you're a first home buyer, and whether you are planning to live in the property itself. So let's start with the price of the property. It's pretty straightforward. The more expensive the property, the more stamp duty you're going to have to pay. So for example, let's say you're buying a property that costs around $600,000. Then you're going to pay around $31,000 in stamp duty. But if you're going to buy a property around $750,000, you're going to have to pay $40,000 in stamp duty. Now in Australia, there's this scheme known as the First Home Owners Grant. This is effectively a discount on your stamp duty if you're buying to live in a property for the first time, and you also meet certain criteria. As mentioned before, stamp duty laws vary from state to state, including how much discount you're going to get from your First Home Owners Grant. For example, in Victoria, if you plan to buy a property that is around $600,000 or less, you pay no stamp duty. Remember that $31,000 you were meant to pay in the previous example? Well, nope. No need to pay for it now. Winning. But what happens if you do go over that $600,000? Well, you'll still get a discount, but it's no longer going to be a 100% discount like before. The discount gets smaller and smaller as the price of the property gets closer and closer to $750,000. Once you hit that mark, then you don't get the discount at all. So if you remember in the first example, buying a $750,000 property meant that you had to pay $40,000 in stamp duty. Well, yeah, even if it is your first property, you still have to pay that $40,000. So as you can see, ideally if you want to avoid to have to pay the upfront cost of stamp duty, then it's best to pay the property that is $600,000 or less. Now there are other fees that you'd have to pay, but they're quite small in comparison to stamp duty. So for example, there is conveyancing fees and bank fees. Conveyancing fees is where you have to pay a solicitor or a conveyancer, which does all the legal paperwork that comes when purchasing a property. These typically cost anywhere between $1,000 to $3,000. As for bank fees, that is because they're dealing with the financial paperwork, and that is usually around $100 to $500. Now the thing to keep in mind is that stamp duty and all of these fees are known as upfront costs. In other words, this is the amount that you'd have to save up before you're able to buy a property. Most people just focus on the deposit because it tends to be the biggest cost. But little do they realize that stamp duty must also be paid before you get the keys to the house. Now, as we mentioned before, it isn't really a worry if you're a first home buyer that is buying a property that is less than $600,000. But as you continue to move higher above that price, stamp duty is something that you'll have to seriously consider. Let's say my girlfriend and I are buying a property to live in and it's our first property. We find a property that's worth $600,000 and we have $130,000 saved up. So what would our upfront cost be? Well, if we put down a 20% deposit, then that comes to $120,000. Now, since we're buying a property that is less than $600,000 and it's our first property, then we qualify for the First Homeowners Grant. This means that we don't have to pay any stamp duty. Now, we still have to pay for legal and bank fees, and so that comes to around $2,000. So that means our total upfront cost comes up to $122,000. We have enough savings to pay for this, and so we're all sweet. Now, if this wasn't our first property, which means that we don't get the First Homeowners Grant, then we'd have to fork out the $31,000 for stamp duty, which then makes our total $153,000. Yeah, and that's a lot of money. We wouldn't have enough savings, given that in the scenario, we said we had $130,000 in savings. So the take-home message is that make sure you buy well for your first property so you take advantage of that discount. But there you go. That's how to check whether or not you have enough savings to put down a deposit on a property. Now, this is the last aspect of the considerations when you think about purchasing a property. Now, if you wanted to see the other videos, then feel free to look in the description because I've linked it there. But besides that, if you can give this video a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't already done so, that would be awesome. And I will catch you in the next video.